Hi everyone, and welcome to South to Cloud, the podcast about cloud, and also cloud. Today we are talking about containers and the amazing technology that we can use on AWS, and we talk about the difference on different container service on AWS and compare them. And go to the intro and see you later. Versus AKS, AWS Container Deathmatch. Today we are compare ECS versus EKS and compare their features, compare their pricing, compare their benefits to use one of them. Who is the best? We try to determine today. In AWS, the first thing is in AWS exists a lot of ways to run a container. Corey Quinn released a post about this 1 or 2 years ago, and he said 17 ways to run a container on AWS, and later he released another blog post about other 70 ways to run a container on AWS. The other 17 are very sometimes are very different and sometimes very bad uses to run a container that are possible. Okay, and we are talking about this only about ECS and EKS because are the bigger AWS service about containers. And the first thing that I will do is put up a disclaimer. Okay, everyone has business. Okay, everyone has their own thoughts about ECS and EKS, and sometimes it's very difficult to be objective. Okay, I will try to be objective, but also I has biases. Okay, biases, and I will try to determine what is the best services. But you need to know that a lot of people have this type of articles and has their own agenda about this for different purposes. Okay, but it's very important. Nobody is objective about this topic. Okay, AWS Container Services. We have ECS and EKS. ECS is Amazon Container Technology. Is a proprietary technology from AWS. Was released on 2014. The primary quality is very simple. It's very easy to use. Has Fargate support from 2019. We talked later about Fargate. And it's AWS core services. A lot of other services on AWS use ECS. Okay, like Glue, like I know Glue. If you run a task on Glue, you will watch that you execute a container. And in the other hand, we have EKS. It's Kubernetes technology. It's based on Kubernetes technology. It's open source technology, very known for everyone. Was released on AWS in 2018, but Kubernetes was released on 2014, the same year than ECS. It's very powerful. The option to scale to unimaginable limits is amazing. Has Fargate support from on 2018, and it's an industry standard. Okay, a lot of people use Kubernetes technology to run their containers. And who is better? And how works? How that container technology works? We have the container, Docker container, for example, and we have the pod or task. Pod or task has one container usually, or two containers with sidecar, and it's the minimal size of a AKS or ECS, the pod or the task. We have the service. That the service is the aggregation of pods because we can have a pod with a container, but we escalate to 2 or 3 pods or 7 pods that do the same thing, but to expose to have the same the same endpoint. We have the service that's group the pods or the tasks. Is the same. Is the same concept. Okay, and to expose them to the world on AKS and Kubernetes, we had the ingress service. Okay, to expose, and on ECS we have the ELV. Ingress can use ELVs, but it's different. Okay, and at the infrastructure level, we have the control plane is the master, Kubernetes master, and on ECS we have the ECS service. Okay, we don't have anything to manage, and we have the nodes as infrastructure on Kubernetes, and on ECS is the instance. Both are easy to install, but the naming is different. Okay, but it's very similar. The comparison is very similar. Now we will watch an ECS example, okay, of it's a SaaS reference architecture. And it's very simple. We have that is with different tenants. The tenants are different set in this case about security group. We have one LV to the giant, the service. We have the service ECS service connect to connect the different tasks. We have 2 tasks that go into the DynamDB. On the EKS is the same example, okay? It's a SaaS EKS reference architecture. It's the same. We have the SaaS application that go into 2 different ingress. The ingress are different of the ALV. You can use ALV or not, or you can use NLV. And we have 2 different tenants, 2 different namespaces on Kubernetes, and we have the 2 microservices and going to the DynamDB. Are very similar, at the same time are very different. We talk the difference later, but are very similar and are very simple architecture. ECS has login, yes, has login. But the first thing that I will say is login is bad, but we need it. Login is like Deadpool, it's a anti-hero, but we need it. We need it. We know that it's bad, but we need it because to have some amazing features, we need to have this login. We need to control the login, but not to avoid, because sometimes it's impossible. And sometimes to avoid the login, we are creating other logins in other aspects. The second thing is both has login. ECS and EKS has login. The first thing is because EKS is an implementation of Amazon, and any implementation of Kubernetes has login. Maybe Kubernetes vanilla doesn't have login, but in general, any Kubernetes stack has login, like OpenShift, like Rancher. If you use other container service like Nomad, has login. Okay, because the implementation are different, and you will say, okay, Miguel, but I can run any container on any Kubernetes system. Okay, but that is not for Kubernetes. That is for the container technology. Okay, for Docker container technology. It's very portable. You can move one container to any container service. If you try to run a container on ECS and run a container on EKS, will be run. Okay, probably will be run. It's not a very hard implementation, or you don't change anything important. The main thing is the Docker is very portable, and that is the reason that we said Kubernetes has not login, but in reality, yes. And that thing is very important because I can use any container, and I can move one container to ECS to EKS using different things. And also, one thing is if I use AWS, I use AWS services has a login. If I use DynamDB, because I need that's amazing database. I have this login. I need to control this login, but not to avoid, because mod my sales database maybe it's worse and maybe it's very hard to do it. Okay. Complexity. We need to talk about complexity on AKS and ECS, obviously, because we need to have different approaches depending of the different things. One thing is the size of the task or pod size, okay? Because sometimes we have different sizes of tasks or pods, different relation over CPU and memory. And if we need an instance with a lot of memory and another instance with a lot of CPU, maybe it's a bad thing. We need to have different node groups on AKS, or in ECS we need to have different cluster to have different instance. Also, we need to think on auto-scaling, because auto-scaling a pod or a task is very easy, but auto-scaling the cluster is more hard, because sometimes on EKS, for me happens, you scale up, but the cluster doesn't scale down, okay? That's hard, and you have a lot of nodes running and you are wasting a lot of money. Also, we need to talk about connectivity, because we need connect pod, but by default, pods can watch other pods about networking. We need to have network policies on EKS, or using security group on ECS. That is easier for me. And also, we need to talk about the permissions and that connectivity. What I need to do, what role on AWS I need to use. On EKS, we need to have a namespace with different roles, and on ECS, you can have a role for every task. You can have different roles on every task, and that is very useful. And when we have these things, we need to talk about the operation mode, or operation task, because on EKS we need to upgrade every 18 months, and sometimes that is hard, because Kubernetes release a new version every 6 months, and that's maybe cost more money, okay? And the last thing is talk about the stateful workloads. That in Kubernetes is not as easy to implement, because it's very hard, but has more support for stateful workloads, because how manage this, you can manage this in different ways. You have more flexibility, but at the same time it's very complex to manage a stateful workload, and sometimes it's very painful for you. And my recommendation is not, if you need a stateful workloads, put in other cluster, in a cluster only for stateful workloads, because will be the better thing for the stateless workloads, because manage stateful workloads is very bad, and you can impact your stateless workloads, okay? Also, we need to talk about the scale, because on Kubernetes, Kubernetes permits scale to amazing level, and this level of scalability is at Google level, okay? And a lot of people think I have a very big cluster. The reality is not. Your cluster is very, very tiny. For putting numbers, a medium cluster is up to about 10 nodes, okay, or more, and less for that is a tiny cluster, okay, it's a small cluster. For a large cluster is about 100 nodes, and depends of the density of pods or tasks, is about 2,000 pods. And a extra large cluster is about 500 nodes, okay, and it's about this number of nodes. And the maximum of Kubernetes is 5,000 nodes. That is the limit of Kubernetes. If you reach this limit, you need to create another cluster. And that's level of scalability, of that level of number is huge. Nobody has this level of cluster. Maybe you, okay, but that is not the usual thing. until now, we can think that EKS has more benefit than ECS. The difference is very low. Maybe you have more operational tasks, but has not a lot of difference about ECS on EKS. But exists a game changer, and this game changer is Fargate. Fargate has ECS mode and EKS mode. Okay, both has a Fargate. Can use Fargate. Fargate create microcluster. Instead, create a big cluster, create microcluster, and it's a serverless service. And that's the possibility of creating microcluster has a lot of benefits. The first benefit is the isolation, because it's very easy to isolate a cluster. You have only one cluster. You can only manage one cluster at permission level and networking level, and it's very easy to implement on Fargate. That level of isolation doesn't exist on when you have a big cluster. It's more hard. Also, it's a serverless services. You only pay for use, and that is very good implementation. And you don't need to optimize your size of pod to accommodate on the cluster. Also has the auto scaling is very easy, because you only need to think on the auto escalation of pods or tasks. This is very easy. You don't need to think on cluster escalation, because that is something that Fargate do it for it. And that is very easy, and it's a very good implementation. You will be escalate up very easily and escalate down very easy and very quick. And it's easy to upgrade. You don't think on the underlying level, and the upgrades are very easy. You don't need to think on them, and it's a very easy mode to implementation. The last thing that we talk is about the cost, because a lot of people say, okay, Fargate is very good, but it's very expensive. Really? We do a comparison, okay, with the ECS, EC2, Fargate, EKS, EC2, and Fargate. And we have some consideration, okay? The side port of task will be one virtual CPU and 2 GB of RAM. We deploy the containers on 3 availability zones, okay? And the cost that you will see is a monthly cost, okay? The first exercise is only 5 containers, okay, on ECS and EKS, EC2 and Fargate model. And the cheapest is the cheapest is ECS on Fargate, and it's very cheap. You will see the more expensive is Fargate EKS. Why? Because on Fargate you need to pay for master, for Kubernetes master, and that is $73 per month per container, per cluster. And that is the problem on EKS on Fargate, okay? It's very expensive for this. But on ECS is very cheap. And in this case, the problem on EC2 is the concentration of pod, okay? It's very low, because we have a cluster very high comparison, and a lot of resources are not using. In this case, we need to know that if the cluster goes down, we need to move the pods, okay? Also, we have 50 containers, okay? The next exercise, the next task, then start the next exercise. And in this case, are very similar, the prices on ECS, EC2, ECS, Fargate, and EKS EC2. Also, the cheapest is Fargate ECS, and Fargate EKS is very expensive, okay? And in this case, the concentration of pods, the density of pods is better, okay? That is the reason to be more similar. When we go to 500 containers, that change, and the cheaper is ECS, okay? It's ECS, and the difference of EKS and ECS on EC2 is the $73 for the master of Kubernetes. Okay, that is the only difference. But maybe the difference is not very high. $7,000. It's not very high at this level. And if you go into 500 containers, okay, it's cheaper, But it's a huge difference about ECS, EC2, and ECS Fargate. But that price for the operational team that you need to manage this, if you go to EC2, is very low. You will pay more. Okay, that is the reason that Fargate is a game changer, because it's very cheap in comparison to EC2, and also you are only pay for the pod that are you using, and usually on EC2 or EKS, for EC2 you need to do a resetting on other groups or cluster, because it's very hard to have a very huge density, container density, because obviously when a cluster goes down, you need to go up to move all your content or your pod to the other node, and sometimes you are not using some capacity of your cluster. Okay, Miguel, but you don't answer who is better, EKS, ECS. You don't answer the question. And yes, I don't answer now. But the answer is very hard and very disappointment for you. Doesn't exist a answer for any use case. Okay, use cases. Depends of your use case, what implementation is better. Maybe I like ECS Fargate because it's very easy to implement, it's very easy to roll, it's very easy to manage. But depends of you, or depends on the size. But sometimes the size doesn't matter, because, for example, you have a lot of accounts, a lot of different developers, a group of developers working for you, different organization, and maybe you have a lot of pods, but in different schemas. And maybe for you, it's better use Fargate to approach this version and this control of every workload in their own team. Or you have a very big cluster, like 7 or 5,000, 7,000 pods or containers, maybe more containers. At this level, maybe that level of complexity that you will need, obviously EKS is better for you, Kubernetes is better for you. Or maybe you need some utility or some power that you don't need full power of Kubernetes, but ECS on EC2 is enough for you, and maybe Fargate don't accomplish all your requirements. Okay, depends of your use case, and that is the most important answer. Depends of you or your use case. It's not depends of who is better. It depends what is your purpose of use. Okay, what are your requirements? And that is all. Bye bye.